Okay, we hear a ton about geopolitics, right? Energy, the crisis in Venezuela, it's all over the news. But what if the real story, the one that truly connects the fuel in our cars to that collapsing country, is something almost nobody talks about? What if it has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the actual chemistry of oil?
So, what if that official story you hear every day is just, well, a mask? A convenient story to cover up a problem that's much deeper, much more fundamental. That's the big question we're going to dig into today based on the material we've been analyzing. All right, so first up, let's just quickly go over the story we all think we know. You know the one. It's easy, it fits perfectly in a headline.
Right, the headlines are just full of it. Drug routes, smuggling, corruption. And look, those things are absolutely tragically real. But the sources we're looking at suggest that this story, it's also a really convenient distraction. It's a way to keep us from talking about a much, much bigger problem hiding in plain sight.
So, to get to that real story, we have to take apart this huge, kind of comforting myth that sits right at the heart of American energy policy.
For years, the story we've been told has been this amazing success story, right? Fracking unlocked these massive oceans of oil right here at home, production went through the roof, and boom, America was finally energy independent. It felt solid, like we'd solved it. But here's the catch. It wasn't the whole truth. And this gets right to the absolute core of it. The myth is so simple. Oil is oil, but it's not. It's just not. And that one little misunderstanding, that's the key that unlocks this entire story. It might actually be one of the most dangerous assumptions in modern politics. Okay, here's why that matters so much. The oil from the big US fracking boom, it's mostly something called light sweet crude. Think of it as thin, kind of like juice. But our biggest, most important refineries, especially the ones down on the Gulf Coast, well, they were built for heavy sour crude. That's the thick, tar-like stuff you get from places like Venezuela. And here's the kicker. The two are just fundamentally incompatible. So just let that sink in for a second. The incredible American oil boom, the one we celebrated, it produced a flood of crude oil that our own industrial backbone literally couldn't handle. The entire system was designed for a very specific diet, and all of a sudden it was being force-fed completely the wrong kind of food. So you see, the really crucial point here isn't just the oil itself. It's the massive, incredibly expensive, and totally inflexible machines that were built to process it. And that is where the real trouble starts. Yeah, these refineries, they're not like an app on your phone you can just update. They're more like giant living creatures that have been calibrated for a very, very specific diet of heavy crude oil. We're talking billions and billions of dollars in sunk costs. You can't just flip a switch and have them process something new. If you feed them the wrong kind of oil for too long, they don't adapt. They just fail. You know, there's actually a name for this whole situation. It's called infrastructure lock-in. It's basically when the big decisions you made in the past, like, say, building all your refineries for heavy oil, end up trapping you in the future. They just dramatically limit your options no matter how much the world changes around you. And this right here creates this huge paradox, one that completely shatters that whole myth of energy independence. Think about it. The US can be the world's #1 oil producer, and at the exact same time be totally, desperately dependent on imports just to keep its own system from choking to death. So this technical problem, it suddenly morphs into a massive geopolitical crisis. Because, okay, if your system absolutely has to have this special heavy crude, the next obvious question is, where in the world do you get it? And the list of suppliers, it's terrifyingly short. The kind of heavy crude that these US refineries need, it only exists in huge quantities in a handful of places. You've got Venezuela, which has the largest reserves on the entire planet. Then you've got Canada, and then there's Russia. Now, for decades, this system actually worked pretty well. A nice, steady supply of that heavy crude from Venezuela flowed north, feeding our refineries. But then, political turmoil hit, the infrastructure started to decay, and finally, sanctions came down. Venezuelan production just collapsed. The tap was basically turned off, leaving all those hungry refineries just waiting. So, what happened? The pressure just shifted. Canada stepped up and became the main supplier. But really, this just swapped one dependency for another. All of a sudden, pipelines from Canada weren't just pipelines, they were national lifelines.
Any disruption to them became a massive threat to U.S. energy security. So, you have to ask, right? What happens if that Canadian supply gets threatened? Or what if it's just not enough? Where does a system that's completely locked into heavy oil turn next? And that is the answer that keeps strategists awake at night. The other major source for the exact kind of crude America needs is a primary geopolitical rival. This isn't some accident of geology, it's immense strategic leverage. Okay, so this brings us to our last section. The really difficult, often unspoken choices that this infrastructure lock-in forces on policymakers.
And this is maybe the most crucial insight of all. Systems that can't adapt, they tend to seek control instead. Think about it. These refineries can't change what they are, so instead, they create this huge pressure to control their environment, to secure the raw materials they need to survive, no matter what it costs.
So, what are the real options on the table? Well, path number one is to rebuild. Spend trillions of dollars and decades retooling the entire system. That's probably politically and economically impossible. Path two, control. Secure that foreign heavy oil by any means necessary. Diplomacy, pressure, maybe even intervention. Or path three, you just cross your fingers and hope for the best. And what does history tell us? Rigid systems almost always choose the path that preserves themselves, and that path is control. And this is why you never hear politicians talking about oil viscosity on the campaign trail. The real story is messy. It's complicated. It reveals these deep, systemic vulnerabilities, and it raises really uncomfortable questions about decades of policy decisions. It's just so much easier to sell a simple story about drugs and corruption. So in the end, Venezuela stops being just some foreign policy issue over there, and it becomes a mirror. It's a stark warning about what happens when we build these massive, rigid systems and just assume the world is always going to bend to fit their needs. It's a warning about how dependency always invites control.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last big question. Now that you can see the hidden logic of this system, what other systems are we trapped inside without even realizing it? In our economies, our technologies, our societies, what other giant machines are out there, silently demanding to be fed?